Hello and assalamu alaikum everyone. Today's video will be on the topic of Muta, or what is known in Islam as temporary marriage. And in today's video we'll cover this topic, showing both the presence of Muta in the Islamic community and how both the Sunnis and the Shias view Muta. And once we've talked a little bit about that, we'll then go on to talk about looking at the foundations of Muta and what are the conditions of Muta. For those people who are interested in learning more about how it is best to be practiced. So what's important to first establish is that Muta was a reality in the practice and culture of the Islamic Ummah at the time of the Prophet Muhammad. And we're not talking about a few years, we're talking about over a decade. And at some point, the people of Al-Sunnah, known as the Sunnis, they came to accept that Muta was no longer something that they, as the people who follow the companions, or certain types of companions, I should say, namely Abu Bakr, Uthman, and Umar and Uthman, and the likes of these types of companions. But then there is another set of companions whom another set of Muslims, i.e. the Shias, follow, beginning with the leadership of Imam Ali and his family, who are the family of the Prophet Muhammad. And they say, or we say, that Muta has been a practice instituted by the Quran, and we have seen permitted by the Prophet Muhammad and practiced by his ummah, or his community, for many years. And there has been no official prohibition by the Prophet Muhammad or even the Quran by way of abrogation for us to not practice Muta, or temporary marriage. So this is the sides between the majority Muslims, known as Sunni, and the second majority Muslims, known as Shias. Now I want to take you through a little bit about what Muta is, for those of you who are maybe just entering into Islam, or who are curious about Islam on this particular topic, before talking to you about the particular views and stances of the two sects. So Muta is basically a legitimate, sanctioned marriage by the Quran. It is different than what is termed a nikah, or a permanent marriage. It is known as a temporary marriage, otherwise referred to as Muta. And Muta comes from the Quranic verse 4:24, chapter 4, verse 24, in which the Quran says, when talking about what is lawful for the men to marry, it starts at first talking about what is unlawful for them, and then it says what is lawful. And it says here, lawful for you is what is beyond all those things that are not lawful, or all those women that are not lawful for you, that you may seek using your wealth in wedlock and not in license, such of them whom you enjoy or istamtatum. Give them their prescribed dowers. Both Shia and Sunnis have agreed that this verse from the Quran is referring to Muta, right, or temporary marriage. Especially the sentence that says, such wives as you enjoy, or istamtatum, right? This verse or this sentence gives permissibility for a muta. Now, muta is essentially marrying a woman for seeking enjoyment or pleasure. And there were instances in where the companions of the Prophet would leave their wives on occasions where they would have to be away from them for extended periods of time. And of course, this became a bit of an issue for some of the companions. And they basically asked the Prophet Muhammad what can be done when they're away from their wives and they no longer have access to sexual intimacy. And the response was that they can marry women of their choice, be they Muslim, Christian, or Jews. And of course, during that time, the way it was practiced was that they would marry single Muslim women. And this was the option given to them to do so. And this marriage is a type of marriage where the man is seeking the pleasure, sexual pleasure, from the woman. Now, that is the original motivation behind it. It doesn't necessarily have to be used in that manner, but certainly that is the original reason behind why it was used in that way. So essentially, the woman is sought out for physical intimacy, and in exchange for this, she is compensated with what is known as a dower, or some kind of financial or in-kind compensation. So it can be money of a certain amount, or it can be property of a certain amount. So this is, and of course, the marriage, because it is temporary, it has certain requirement to ensure that the marriage ends at a specific period in time. Now, that time, and I'll talk more about this, but the time is always, it can be shortened or it can be extended, but it has to come to an end at some specific time in time. And so this becomes what is known as temporary marriage, or otherwise Muta. The Quranic verse that I had recently quoted you was revealed towards the beginning of the Prophet's stay in Medina. Now, Medina was a city that he had moved from Mecca, his original city, and there he grew his community. And he went there in 622 Christian era, and he left there around 632 Christian era. And during this time, the Prophet encouraged his companions there in Medina to seek enjoyment, or istamtatum, from the women, right? To enjoy them for a limited period of time in exchange for a specified sum of money or property. Now, the Sunnis, like I said, have agreed that this was certainly a practice of the Prophet Muhammad. But then they later took the position that and we have to understand their position, because it starts originally with Umar ibn Khattab. Now, Umar ibn Khattab is a historical figure within Islam. He's one of the well-known companions of the Prophet Muhammad, and he is also the second caliph, or the second governor or ruler of the Islamic Ummah after the passing away of the Prophet Muhammad. And he, at some point in time, when he became the caliph, when he became the ruler of Islam, he issued certain edicts banning the practice of Muta. So Muta was something that was accepted right up until the time of Umar. Prior to that, the Prophet himself never banned Muta. The Quran certainly didn't ban Muta. And we don't have any widespread or substantive hadiths from other companions stating that the Prophet Muhammad banned Muta. And of course we'll talk more about that. However, to justify Umar's position, the people of Al-Sunnah made certain arguments to substantiate his position. And the first argument that they make is they say that, no, the Quran actually abrogates the verse that permitted Muta. So just to unpack this, there is a hadith from the Prophet Muhammad's wife, Aisha, who is also of the people of Al-Sunnah. And they quote her saying that she says that this particular verse in the Quran actually abrogates the verse of the Quran in which I just quoted that permitted Muta. Now, we have to understand abrogation, because abrogation is a term that simply means that when the Quran permits certain things, it may later on in time prohibit them, right? And we have seen instances where this is the case. And of course, there's a whole science of hadiths. There's a whole science behind abrogation of verses that are abrogated and verses that are abrogating. And they have argued that the verse that I will discuss with you in just a moment goes to abrogate the verse that I had just read to you. So this is the first argument that they make. The second argument that they make is they say, well, that Omar himself has banned Muta, and this, of course, when Omar did so, there are certain, when analyzing that hadith, there are certain arguments that they make, and we will talk about that. And then, of course, the third argument that they make is they say, well, we have all the hadiths as well that show from Imam Ali and from Ibn Sabra that these hadiths confirm that the Prophet Muhammad did, in fact, prohibit Muta. And we will discuss that in turn as well. So let's address the first argument that they make regarding abrogation of the Quranic verse. Now, like I said, the source of this argument of theirs comes from Aisha, who is a notable figure among the Sunnis. She is, of course, one of the wives of the Prophet Muhammad, and they extol her and they praise her and they hold her quite dear. And so this hadith, they say, comes from her. And they say that according to Aisha, that Muta is forbidden and abrogated in the Quran, chapter 23, verse 1 to verse 6, in which the Quran says, that prosperous are the believers who guard their private parts, safe from their wives and what their right hands possess. So according to Aisha and the people of Al-Sunnah, this verse, right, for them it states two things. One is that it abrogates the permissibility of the verse permitting Muta. And secondly, the argument that they make is that this verse that permits Muta, the verse condone marriage only in two instances. One is that that you protect your private parts, save from your wives and what your hands possess or own. Now, in the first instance, your wives is very clear to the women that you're married to, or to those who you possess through your property. And of course, this is referring to slave women. So the people of Al-Sunnah say, well, we know that Muta, as it is practiced today or after the Prophet Muhammad's time, you certainly can't, there's certainly no slave girl options or slave women options. So Muta then becomes impermissible, because to be in a marriage relationship, the only marriage relationship that the Quran is talking about here is a permanent marriage relationship. And they further argue that the permanent marriage relationship is the only relationship in which you find all of the other factors that come along with, or features that come along with, the permanent marriage relationship. Namely, things like inheritance, sworn allegation, divorce, or the waiting period. These are other factors or features of a marriage that are only, according to them, pertain to the permanent marriage. And they say because a Muta marriage doesn't have these other features or factors that come along with it, therefore, it cannot be seen to be a legitimate union or relationship. So in response to the Quranic verse abrogating the permissibility verse, Shia scholars have noted that this verse that they have given, it's actually not an abrogating verse. And so the verse that the people of Al-Sunnah or the Sunnis say use as an argument to say that it abrogates Muta was actually a verse that was revealed in Mecca, while the verse establishing Muta was actually revealed after the Prophet had migrated to Medina. And so our scholars have shown quite conclusively that you can't have a verse abrogating. You can't have a verse claiming to abrogate another verse when that verse preceded the verse that you're saying that it abrogates. In other words, because the Meccan verse was foremost in time and the Muta verse came after, there's no way that the Mecca verse could be abrogating the Medina verse. Because the way abrogation works, as if you're a Muslim, as you're quite aware of this, that an abrogating verse has to come after the verse that it is abrogated or that it seeks to cancel. So this is the first issue that we have with the claims of the people of Al-Sunnah. And of course, they go on to say that a wife by Muta is not a legitimate wife because she does not fulfill the legal requirements or the Sharia, right? The Sharia requirements for being a wife. Now, they say this because, like I said, that those aspects or factors that, such as inheritance, divorce, the waiting period after divorce, etc., are all part of those things that are concomitant with permanent marriage or associated only with permanent marriage, at least to them. And so they say that because these things are not part of Muta, this delegitimizes the union between a man and a woman in the context of a Muta marriage. The case of inheritance, they say that because this is only an instance where we find this particular feature in the permanent marriage, they say it proves then that Muta is an exception that is not permissible. So Shias in response say that in the case of inheritance, the Quranic verse is a very general verse, and there is no reason to suppose that it may that it may have certain it may not have certain exceptions. In fact, the specific requirements of Muta as established by the Hadith literature show that Muta is an exception. Nor is it the only exception, since there are other exceptions, such as an unbeliever cannot inherit from a Muslim, nor can a murderer inherit from his victim. In short, inheritance pertains to permanent marriage, but in permanent marriage, it has certain exceptions, so that the verse establishing inheritance cannot be interpreted as nullifying Muta's validity. In a similar manner, there are numerous hadiths that exist to prove that a wife by Muta must observe the waiting period. Now, the waiting period is something that Muslim women are required to do or to wait after they have been divorced. And this, of course, is to ensure in the event that there's any pregnancy, that there's no a confusion about who the child belongs to, in case she ends up getting married shortly after she's divorced, and find out later on that she's pregnant, but she's already remarried by that time. This is just an example to show the practical benefit of the waiting period. Now, now we even have some hadiths from the Sunnis that speaks of the waiting period, in which and the notable Sunni scholars have recorded hadiths from a well-known companion, Ibn Abbas, who's also, I believe he's one of the Prophet's family member, and he is asked, is there a waiting period in Muta? In other words, does the woman have to wait after she's divorced or after her Muta marriage comes to an end? And he says, yes, a menstrual period. Now, some Sunnis argue that Muta cannot be considered a legitimate form of sexual union because it lacks essential elements such as inheritance, such as divorce, such as forswearing or zihar. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those are. They say that these are necessary components of a marriage or of a permanent marriage that do not apply to Muta. And it cannot, as a result of these factors being absent, a Muta cannot be considered a valid marriage. And therefore, this type of intimate relationship is invalid or impermissible or illegitimate. Now, with respect to the divorce, a legitimate sexual relationship may be dissolved without divorce in the case of a wife who is the subject of a sworn allegation, or a spouse who leaves Islam. Now, I'll explain what a sworn allegation is in just a second. Or a slave girl who is sold. So, with respect to divorce, in a permanent marriage, we see that in cases of sworn allegations where a couple may enter the court and have to swear before the judge. Of course, an example of that would be where if a man finds that, is convinced that his wife has cheated on him or committed adultery, he can go to the court and swear before the judge, right? And this is known as a sworn allegation. And she can revert the punishment or the legal punishment by also swearing. And but in this event, whether he swears or she swears, what happens automatically is the couples become divorced. Okay, this is called sworn allegation, and it's so the Sunnis have said that this type of sworn allegation can only exist with respect to a permanent marriage, right? But here we, the Shias, say yes, that is true, but there are exceptions such as this, where a divorce, there are certain Islamic procedures for a divorce. There are certain steps that must be taken even prior to a divorce happening. So a couple don't just get divorced just like that. However, in the courts, we see that there is this exception. At the moment these two swear against each other, the marriage becomes the marriage is dissolved, and there's no divorce process. So we Shias are saying, look, with respect to divorce and respect to permanent marriage, we see that there are exceptions to divorce, and we give multiple examples. Not only the forswearing, but we also show that in a case where one party of the couple decides to become an apostate, automatically their marriage becomes dissolved. Okay, and it skips that divorce process. There is also another case in the time at the time of the Prophet, or the time where there were slaves and people did marry slaves. They say Islam says that the moment you sell your slave girl that you're married to, the marriage becomes dissolved automatically upon the sale of that slave girl. So even though these are aspects pertaining to a permanent marriage, we the Shias show that there are exceptions to these aspects of permanent marriages. So things like sworn allegation, forswearing, and zihar are all concomitants of permanent marriage, not of legitimate sexual relationships in general. Now, I should explain to you what a zihar or forswearing is. I didn't take the time to do that. So let me just double back quickly and say that forswearing is basically zihar. And zihar was a practice amongst permanent married couples where the husband used to be involved in a cultural practice that Islam found reprehensible, and it's called a zihar or forswearing. And basically what the man would do to his wife is that he would swear that she was to him as his mother's back. Now, what this meant, or what this effectively did when Islam came, was Islam said that if a man does this, what happens is, because when he does this, it ultimately means in the culture that she has become like his mother, meaning that he is no longer going to have any sexual relationship with her. And it effectively nullified the woman's rights to have intimate relationship with her husband. And so when Islam came, Islam said, well, if you do that, then what happens is you are no longer allowed for each other, or lawful for each other in that way, in a physical, intimate way. And so in order for you to at this point you're considered separated, but not fully divorced. And Islam says that if the woman starts to demand her sexual rights from her husband, he then has to do one of two things. He has to either divorce her, or if he wants to retain her and retain the marriage, he then has to do kafara, or compensation. And there's a list of things that he has to do, or the options of things he has to do before he can regain that status of being a full husband to her. And so Shias have said, look, even in the case of these instances, we see that that in the case of a slave girl, we don't see zihar being permissible. So, for instance, zihar can only be practiced with a free Muslim woman. It cannot be practiced, or it is not recognized, right, in the instance of a marriage of a man who is married to a slave girl, right? He cannot swear zihar towards her. And so the Shias are saying, look, in a permanent marriage, there's all these exceptions, okay? And the Muta marriage is in itself an exception. So for Sunnis to say that unless you have these aspects to the marriage, then that we see in a permanent marriage, then this exception of Muta is invalid. And the Shias are saying, no, this is not the case. Now, with respect to the sermon of Umar who bans Muta. Now, there is a famous sermon by the second caliph, Umar ibn Khattab, in which he bans Muta by uttering the following words. He says to to the people who he was addressing, he says, 2 mutas were practiced during the time of the Prophet Muhammad. First, he says, the muta of temporary marriage, and then the muta al-hajj. I won't get too much into the al-hajj, but what I would say is that muta al-hajj, although he banned it, Sunnis to this day still practice muta al-hajj. And one of the arguments of the Shias is that how is it that he can ban both, but now you have allowed yourself the one but not the other? So that's one contention that we offer, or one question we ask the people of Al-Sunnah. In any event, and he goes on to say in his sermon, he says that, but I have forbidden both of them, and I will punish anyone who practices either. Now, one of the great known scholars among the people of Al-Sunnah is Al-Razi. And Al-Razi was from about 854 to 925 to 935. And he was a great philosopher and physician and alchemist. And he writes in his works, and he says that this hadith that we have of Umar ibn Khattab concludes that he says that when he addressed the companions by saying this, the companions who were present didn't say anything. And he says that because the companions didn't say anything, it only could have meant that Umar, they had known that this that Muta had been something prohibited at this time. And he says, therefore, this hadith, what Omar was saying is true, that the Muta is indeed something that has been forbidden. Now, the Shias retort and say, well, if Omar's prohibition was based on independent judgment, meaning, or ijtihad meaning that, this person has come to their own conclusions, of course, meaning that the conclusions is based on someone who is knowledgeable and informed well enough within the Islamic, juridical literature to make a pronouncement of that sort. We, the Shias, say, well, then it is baseless, since all of the ulama agree that independent judgment can never contradict the Quran or the hadiths. Now, we say this to mean that the hadiths and the Quran already very clearly have accepted and have made permissible Muta marriages. So if we have someone like Omar who's making these pronouncements, we say, well, his pronouncements, he's in no authoritative position to overrule the teachings of the Quran and the hadiths. We say that if he was attributing, though, the prohibition to the Prophet Muhammad, as to say that he's forbidden these two things because it was something that the Prophet Muhammad himself forbid, then we Shias say then this really cannot be taken to be a sound hadith, because the companions have given witness to the fact that Muta was permitted during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad up until his death. So in general, the Shia argue that if Omar's prohibition had been based upon the words of the Prophet, then other companions could have or would have known about it. How is it possible that the Prophet to have forbidden Muta, yet during the rest of his lifetime, that of Abu Bakr's lifetime, Abu Bakr being the first caliph or the first ruler of Islam, and then the beginning of Umar's caliph or rulership, for this prohibition to have remained unknown to everyone but Umar. So this is another issue that we take up with Umar, which is that for all the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, Abu Bakr, and now up until a great part of his rulership, Muta has never been forbidden. This is the first time we're hearing about this, and we don't have this attestation from the other companions. So this is for one of the reasons why Shias have rejected the hadiths of Omar forbidding the Muta. Sunnis go on to say, no, but we also have hadiths that we have other hadiths from Imam Ali and Ibn Sabar. And the hadiths that they have from Ali comes from what is known as the Sunni sound collections, or the Siha, meaning that these hadiths are sound, they say. And the one hadith that they have from Imam Ali, of course, is among the Shias the first rightful success of the Prophet. And they say, well, look, see, we have a hadith here from Imam Ali in which he says that verily the Prophet of Allah banned the Muta of temporary marriage and eating of meat of the domesticated donkey. And the hadith is also found among the Shia hadiths. However, this hadith actually ends with a last phrase or a last sentence in which it says, on the day of the Battle of Khaybar. In other words, the hadith says that the Prophet Muhammad banned Muta marriage, and he also banned the eating of donkey meat on the day of Khaybar. Now, Khaybar is the day in which a battle, Khaybar is the name of a battle. And so it's very well known in history, the time of Khaybar, of this battle. So what it does is it timestamps this hadith, and it tells us exactly when this hadith is being attributed to the Prophet at the Battle of Khaybar. The other hadith that they use is another hadith from Ibn Sabr. Now, Ibn Sabr is the son of this person, and Ibn Sabr quotes from his father that I came upon the Prophet Muhammad in the early morning, leaning against the Kaaba. And the Prophet Muhammad said, O people, I commanded you to seek enjoyment or istimta, which is the word referred to Muta marriage, from these women. But now Allah has forbidden that to you up until the day of judgment. So if you have a temporary wife, let her go, and do not take back anything of the dower of what you have given them. Now, regarding the first hadith, the hadith with it's attributed to Imam Ali, the Shias say that this hadith is clearly a falsified hadith. It's not an authentic hadith because it dates back, it attributes the saying of the Prophet Muhammad to the time of the Battle of Khaybar. And we know, and this is attested to and agreed by all Shias and Sunni scholars, that Muta was permitted in the year of when Mecca was conquered. Okay, when the city of Mecca was conquered. And the Battle of Khaybar, the day in which this hadith has been attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, happened 3 years prior or 3 years before the conquest of Mecca. So we know quite clearly that there's no way that the Prophet Muhammad could have banned Muta 3 years prior to him instituting the hadith. In fact, 3 years after Mecca was conquered, it was then that the Prophet Muhammad had instituted the practice of temporary marriages. So right away we know this is a false hadith. So we refute that hadith on those grounds. Regarding the second hadith, we have Shias have pointed out, look, that this hadith only has one source, namely Ibn Sabr. And he narrates, he says he heard it from his father, who heard it from the Prophet Muhammad. Now, it may be true, but we don't know because this hadith only has one source. And in the hadith literature, when we look for what can be considered a sound or a authentic or a strong authentic hadith, we generally look for hadiths that have multiple sources. In this case, we only have Ibn Sabr to rely on for the veracity of what he's saying. And so we, the Shias, say, look, we cannot accept this hadith because this is known as a wahid hadith. It's a single source hadith. And therefore, we consider it a weak hadith.